Point I was trying to make with D-Day was saying a bunch of individuals are involved in this battle. And in the same way we have in this section of Samuel, we have two armies forming. We have an army that is basically supporting God's will, and an army that is supporting the will of an usurper who is trying to fight against God, doesn't even care what God thinks. And you have all these individuals making it up, even people who aren't actually soldiers. And what I'm going to try and say is the fact that God is sovereignly using all these people, just like he is sovereignly using our lives, even as inconsequential as they seem sometimes. Absalom had a lot of friends. He seems to be empowered. He has the whole nation on his side. But God has given David a number of men and women to assist him returning to the throne. So just a reminder, as we go through the book, what is the purpose? If you're saying, what is the goal? What should we be trying to see when we read 1st and 2nd Samuel? I'm going to keep asking this question. Do you guys get this ground in your mind? Who is the main character we're looking for in 1st and 2nd Samuel? The king. So whenever you read both these books, you're asking, who should be the king? Who is the king of Israel supposed to be? And you go from this time where God is the king to where God sets up a king, and then David could be the king, but he's not a very good king. We need one of his sons to be king, ultimately Jesus. So the book is leading us to the need for Jesus. Now, quick review of where we've been in this book. In chapter 15, this whole section here, Absalom goes around and steals the hearts of the people. Then in 7 through 10, he goes to Hebron and there declares himself king over Israel. And all the people cheer. And he starts marching towards Jerusalem and picks up one of David's most important advisors, Ahithophel. Then, as he continues on, David has to flee from Jerusalem, and David finds supportive friends as well, both through the Gentiles who support him and the priests who support him. It's moving ahead. Then David, in a moment of desperation, verses 20 through 21, finds that Ahithophel, his great advisor and friend, has deserted him, has gone with Absalom, but the benefit is he actually stops and prays. The first recorded prayer we have for him in years. You see, 32 through 37, God answers that prayer right away by bringing Hushai up to his door, or his standing places outside. And there, he's able to tell Hushai a plan to go against the wisdom of Ahithophel. David faces Ziba, who lies to him and manipulates him, and he falls into it. Then David is cursed by Shimei, who says, you're having this all happen because you are a bad king, a king of blood. And David doesn't have him killed, but says, if God vindicates him or vindicates me, it's up to God. Then David arrives at the Jordan River, and they all take a break. They've escaped, or at least so they think. We go back to Jerusalem, and we found out that Ahithophel enters into Jerusalem with Absalom, and Hushai is able to come and say, all right, here I am here. I want to support you just like I supported David. Absalom allows him in. The spy is now in to the story. And then Absalom goes to Ahithophel, not Hushai. He goes to the betrayer for counsel. Say, what should I do? And he tells him, go and sleep with your father's concubines in view of everyone so that there will be no going back from this point. We talked about how this was really bad because this, like here, the whole plan was for Hushai to be the advisor, but Ahithophel is being listened to. Then in 17, 1 through 4, Ahithophel gives the great counsel, make a strike team, go after David while he's weak. We will defeat him now, and it will never be a problem again. And for some surprising event, only because the Lord was at work, Absalom turns to Hushai and says, "Hey, Hushai, what do you think?" And they decide to listen to Hushai's advice as he strokes their pride and he encourages their fears. And they say, "You know what, you're right. Let's gather a giant army together and we are going to go after David." Pastor Richard Phillips, writing on this, says, "It's encouraging to know that resourceful Christian heroes are working behind the scenes. And when we learn of them, we naturally rejoice, though there can be only so many Hushais at one time. But here we find the truth of Psalm 121, which tells us that God is not asleep or unseen when we go through our trials. To the contrary, the Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand." Psalm 121, verse 5. The Lord is working for David. But Hushai doesn't actually get the chance to hear that his plan has been accepted. All he knows is that he is given some counsel, and he leaves the chambers and he tries to go and find a way to save David from this attack that Ahithophel has planned. That's the review. Today we're going to see 4 human interactions God orchestrates for David to be rescued. And these are just 4 different humans, sets of humans interacting that is all set up for God to rescue David. Sound good? Starts off with Hushai's message needs to get out. Hushai's message needs to get out. Hushai was given a plan by David. If you look back at chapter 15, verse 28, when they ran to each other, David said, "I will wait at the fords of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me." So David's waiting for this advice to get to him over here. And he's leaving behind. He wants him to go from Jerusalem up to the fords where he will be waiting. And the message has to first go through the priests, has to jump around. Verse 15 and 16. Then Hushai said to Zadok and Abiathar the priests, "Thus and so did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and the elders of Israel, and thus and so I have counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, do not stay tonight at the fords of the wilderness, but by all means pass over, lest the king and all the people who are with him be swallowed up." Again, picture in your mind the situation. David has to, Hushai. He's in the palace. He leaves the palace gates, and he goes to the temple area where the tabernacle is set up to speak with the 2 high priests. Notice them, he doesn't say which advice they accepted, does he? He says, here are the 2 counsels that have been given, and he doesn't know which one has been accepted yet, because presumably he was asked to leave, the doors were closed, and Absalom and his advisors discussed, what are we going to choose? And the part that we know, because we read the story, Hushai doesn't know yet. Notice he says repeatedly the word haste. In verse 16, he says, "Send quickly." In verse 18, it says they went quickly. In verse 21, and they went out and told David, "Go quickly." What do they have to do? Or I should say it again. What speed at which they have to move at? Quickly. Why do they have to move quickly? What? Go back to chapter 17, verse 1. Ahithophel had a plan. When did he want to attack? According to chapter 17, verse 1.
Right. He's weary.
What? When he's weary? That night. All right. So if you knew that an earthquake was happening tonight and it was going to decimate your whole house would be destroyed, what might you go home and do? Yeah. With slow tenderness? No. Exactly. You're like, I'm out of here, I'm running. Or you think of fires, right? You get the warning for a fire's coming and you have to evacuate tonight. You move quickly. That's basically the idea he's giving here, is move quickly. Ahithophel's strike force might be coming, but why is it not coming, according to verse 14? What does verse 14 say is the reason the strike force isn't coming? Yeah. So who's the one behind this, Victor, that you brought up? God's the one behind this. But he doesn't know that yet. And so he gives the counsel, share to David, leave quickly, get out of Dodge. Again, God is using men to get David moving. But the message requires some carriers. All right, so here they have the message, and he has to flee away from this spot, cross the river. In the meantime, the message has to go to the sons, to the sons of the priests. Kind of like the old Pony Express, right? Before we had a long line, you had to pass the message along from person to person, and they're running. It's so fun. So here, think of this as a chain that has to go, right? We find the sons of the priests, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, are just south of Jerusalem in a place called En-Rogel. En-Rogel is now known as Job's Well, has a famous well there just south of where the Kidron Valley meets the Hinnom Valley, which you can't really see on this picture because it's zoomed in so close, but it's just right outside of the gate walls. It's like from here, if our church was the city walls, then the freeway underpass would be En-Rogel. So this isn't a long trip. But the problem is that the priest's sons are known collaborators of David. For some reason, they can't be seen. And in a moment, when they are seen, it'll be bad. And so they're hiding out there. Verse 17. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting at En-Rogel. A female servant was to go and tell them. And they were to go and tell King David, for they had not been seen entering the city. But a young man saw them and told Absalom. So both of them went quickly and came to the house of a man at Bahurim, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. And the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and scattered grain on it, and nothing was known of it. When Absalom's servants came to the woman of the house, they said, "Where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan?" And the woman said to them, "They have gone over the brook of water." And when they had sought and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. So the message has to get from the priests to their sons. So it went from Hushai to the priests, and then who does he send to his sons? A woman, a servant woman. This servant girl would travel often to En-Rogel to pick up water because there was a famous well here. And so they would gather and she would go down to this well and proceed to pick up water in a jar and carry it back up to the city of Jerusalem. This is before a spring gets put in later by King Hezekiah. Right now, they have to go out of the city, get water, go back in. Pretty typical thing. Just think about it, right? It's a very menial task. There is no importance to this woman. And imagine, if you're in the ancient Near East in David's time, what did most people think about servant girls who picked up water? High view, low view? Low view. Like, how low? Low.
Slave low.
Slave low. Like, worth nothing low. This girl was able to get out of Jerusalem because no one cared about her. But God had perfectly positioned her to be part of his rescue plan, and she is drafted into the spy ring for the king. Think about that. A woman who had no point, who society didn't care about, and yet God had her positioned so that she could be part of this spy ring. Now, she lets them know the message, but things do not go so well, as in verse 18, we see Absalom's soldiers see these two men who they know, for whatever reason, are with David, and they go chasing after them. So the men take off, and they go to Bahurim, which is about a mile northeast of Jerusalem. Again, we're really tight. It's super close. If they're running really fast, they can probably get there in like 6-7 minutes if they are in pretty good shape. So they're taking off. And there they find a wealthy man. A wealthy man, we know he's wealthy because he has a fancy courtyard in his house. And most people did not have courtyards. And there in that courtyard was a well. Wells often like this, they just dig big holes in the ground and then put something on top of it to keep anyone from falling into it. They'd go down, the water would pool underneath. And so the man's wife allows the men to slide into the well. They're hiding in there, in close, and she covers it with just the stuff from the farm. Then the soldiers arrive, and they say, "Where are they?" And the woman lies to protect them. She admits she saw them, as her, she's like, "Well, I saw them, and they've already left over the water," is possibly the translation there. So I guess technically they are over water, so maybe she's not lying. But they take off, they go looking for them, they can't find them, and they go back to Jerusalem. And then, because she allowed them to escape, the message is able to go to David. Verse 21. After they had gone, the men came up out of the well and went and told King David. Then David said to the men, "Arise and go quickly over the water, for thus and so has Ahithophel counseled against you." Then David arose, and all the people who were with him, and they crossed the Jordan. By daybreak, no one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. So the men get up out of the cave, or the hole in the ground, probably better, and they take off from Bahurim and go all the way over to the fords of the Jordan. They look out on the beautiful waters, though it's probably very dark at this time. And they inform David, "You need to go." David and his soldiers have just been through a great, horrible ordeal. We spent a lot of time just working through the difficulties there. You're like, all right, here he finally thinks he's getting rest. And guess what? One more time, God has taken him to the end of himself and then pushes him a little bit further. David is told that Ahithophel may be coming with a strike force and they need to run. And by the time the sun rises, David and all his soldiers and his wives and his children have safely crossed over. All because of the message that was sent through this spy ring. I guess this is my thought on this too, because sometimes when we read the Bible, people often tell you, find yourself in a Bible story. Find you. And too often we're like, yeah, I want to be David. I want to be doing the great things. Just not like David committing adultery, David, but like David killing Goliath, David. That's who I want to be, right? But most of us are not David in God's plans. And that's probably a good thing. In fact, David himself is just the opening act for Jesus, right? He's the one pointing to Jesus saying, I wasn't good enough, you need Jesus. But we are more like these people in the story. We are more like the slave girl than anyone else. As I was preparing this, sometimes I have just different random music going on, and the song Dream Small by Josh Wilson came up. It just was on rotation, it just came up, and in it he says, It's a mama singing songs about the Lord. It's a daddy spending family time that the world says he cannot afford. These simple moments change the world. It's a pastor of a tiny little church, 40 years loving on the broken and the hurt. These simple moments change the world. Dream small. Don't buy the lie, you've got to do it all. Just like Jesus used you where you are, one day at a time. Isn't that curious? God does his work and he uses normal, boring people like us to accomplish his great plans. So you don't know, God may call you to something amazing. You might have a moment where you have to stand on by your faith before a crowd who says, "Are you a Christian?" There's people who are going on the streets and yelling at people who are sitting outside eating their dinner. "Are you a Christian?" As a mob comes. But most of the time, it's just we have to live as Paul tells us, 2 Corinthians 5:7. Walk by faith and not by sight. Serve God well in the things he commands, which are pretty basic. Love your neighbor, love God, serve your family, do your job to the glory of God, tell people about the Savior you have. It's not that amazing. But who knows how our story will fit into the larger story? Who knows what God might do for someone else through you and me? We are normal, boring people, like the sons of the priests who never even get the chance to do it, the job, or a servant girl who had a boring time carrying water. God uses us. Now, the second human situation here needs to occur to ensure David's safety because there is still the danger of Ahithophel's wisdom. And his wisdom needs to be defeated. Now, verse 23, we read, when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey and went off home to his own city. He set his house in order and hanged himself. And he died and was buried in the tomb of his father. Let's refresh. How wise was Ahithophel? Oh, if you go back to chapter 16, verse 23, how often were Ahithophel's decisions followed? Chapter 16, verse 23. What does it say? How often was his decisions followed? It was esteemed. It was valued. It says Ahithophel was as if one consulted the word of God. Ahithophel, and maybe God's just like a little bit higher than him, but you listen to Ahithophel. And he returns, finding out his wisdom was not followed. And so he's like, okay, he leaves Jerusalem and heads home to Gilo. And he puts all his affairs in orders and proceeds to take his own life, committing self-murder. His family probably remembered him going straight to his desk as though his business matters were on his mind, and later they found him hanging, dead. Vintage Ahithophel, efficient, methodical. He just went and had it done. It's really easy to mock his response. Some commentators believe that Ahithophel was so prideful that he would rather die than his counsel be ignored. And so his counsel's ignored. He's like, forget it. But other commentators say he's probably so wise that he knows the only way to defeat David was his plan. And since since Ahithophel's plan to defeat David was not taken, who's going to win the war now? David. He knows that. He's like, the door's closed. And rather than seek forgiveness of David when he wins, or at least try and fight and turn the tide of the war, he just decides self-murder is the easiest option. He gives in. Now, I talked about this a little bit on Sunday morning. We talked about the sixth commandment, not to murder. And you got to remember how sad is the sin of self-murder. Studies show that 5.8% of men, 9.5% of women will experience a depressive episode in any given year. Suicide sometimes results from that depression and is the leading cause of violent deaths worldwide, accounting for 49.1% of violent deaths. That's a lot of people. Julie Goshek, writing about the pain of being left behind after a suicide in her family, says, "Suicide is not a genetic trait, nor is it a family curse. Suicide is a sinful choice made by an individual. This statement is neither unloving nor disrespectful. It is the truth. I dearly loved my family members that committed suicide, but their choices were sinful and not righteous." We have to bring this up because some people look at this example and say, oh no, suicide is acceptable in the Bible. Because there are 6 examples of people killing themselves in the Bible. 5 of them in the Old Testament, 1 in the New Testament. We see in the Old Testament, we have Abimelech in Judges 9, Saul and Saul's armor bearer in 1 Samuel 31, Ahithophel here, and Zimri in 1 Kings 16:18. And all of them are just like this passage. Does the passage say anything good or bad about Ahithophel's self-murder? Does it say he sinned? No, it doesn't say that. And so one commentator named Drogi says, none of these biblical figures receive censure. Indeed, their suicides are scarcely commented on, leading one to conclude that in the ancient Israel, the act of suicide was regarded as something natural and heroic. Now, here's a big problem. Is it a good idea to make an argument from silence? Is it a good argument if it says nothing to say, well, that means this? It's always a bad idea. Got to be careful. But even that, the overall context on Ahithophel is actually really bad. Because think of it this way. Why is Ahithophel not just a guy who picked the wrong horse? You know the story. It's so sad, right? Where someone has a gambling issue, and they are sinfully obsessed with gambling, and they put all their money on the wrong horse, and the horse loses. They lose all their money, and the only choice they have left is like, I got to kill myself because I've gotten so much shame, or I've lost all my money, whatever. He's not that. Why? What does it mean to go against David? Is it just picking a different horse? Who chose David? God did. So if you go against David, who are you going against? This is exactly what Psalm 2 warns about. That he is going against God's anointed, his Christ. And unlike Jesus, no one had any reason to go against him. He was a godly man. He just pure, literally the God man. Never did anything wrong to anyone. And he has some good reasons to be upset at David, but still he was the enemy of God. And his end here is not just, oh man, this guy just chose to end his life. No, this is an example of what happens to the enemies of the king and his kingdom. You cannot attack the kingdom of God without being crushed by the power of God. And Ahithophel enters that. He is crushed by the power of God, which caused Absalom to ignore his wisdom. God did not cause Ahithophel to commit suicide. Ahithophel could have repented, but it was God calls his wisdom to not be heeded. I'd say the example is not to be Ahithophel, no, it's okay to commit suicide. No. It is wrong to do so. And we have to encourage people that it's wrong to fight against it, to not give in. Interestingly, side note, a 2016 study published in the JAMA Psychiatry magazine found that American women who attend religious service at least 1 week and did some activity that were 5 times less likely to commit suicide. Now, there's a question of chicken or egg issue. Is it because they went to church, or is it because they went to church and got whatever? But the point is, one of the things we can do with people who are struggling, don't have them fight God, encourage them to serve God. But if someone has, like Ahithophel, guilt, they've done something wrong, their situation is the result of sin on their behalf. Who was the one New Testament suicide we know of? Judas. And Judas committed suicide. Why? He betrayed Jesus, yeah. But let's remember, Peter also betrayed him. Peter denied him, swore that he did not know him. And what did Jesus do with Peter? Did he condemn him and say, you should have committed suicide too? No. What did he do? He forgave him 3 times, reconciled him. No matter what sin or betrayal of God, there is no need for self-murder ever. Instead, the person can be like the prodigal son, saying, Luke 15, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and let us eat. For this son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Was the father angry because his son had returned after sinning? What did his father do? Welcomed him, had a party. When someone who has sinned and betrayed God returns in repentance, does God condemn us? Always has a smile for us. Ahithophel could have had a smile, even from David. But he takes the wrong way out. Judas could have even been forgiven. And so we remember just the hope exists, forgiveness exists, no matter the sin. David has fled to safety. His chief opponent is gone. And then third, Absalom's forces need to be delayed. 24 through 26, the human interaction actually needs to take place now, where they give David time enough to flee. Verse 24 says, then David came to Mahanaim, and Absalom crossed the Jordan with all the men of Israel. Now Absalom had set Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra the Ishmaelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. And Israel and Absalom camped in the land of Gilead. So David's able to go north to Mahanaim. There you go. Funny Hebrew name. But the story actually jumps back there in verse 27. So we'll talk about David's journey there. But right now, Absalom is being delayed to allow David to escape north. Go back and look in verse 11. What is Hushai's counsel to David, or to Absalom? What is Hushai's counsel to Absalom? He needs to gather what? All of Israel from? Yeah, which is a fancy way of saying from shore to shore. The whole area. Get everyone, right? And a huge army is going to be put together. And what does a king need when he gathers a huge army to help him guide that huge army? A general. And so he brings in Amasai. His name is really emphatic in this position. It's the first in the Hebrew, and he has notoriety or importance. He spends a lot of time talking about his family because his father was Jesser, and his mother was Abigail, the daughter of Jesse. So she was David's half-sister. That means Amasa was also the cousin of Joab. So Absalom gets his second cousin or whatever. But this is Joab's first cousin. He's replaced Joab with his cousin because most of the time in the ancient world, your kingdom was really about your family. Right? So he gets his family together, someone else who's part of this royal line to fight for him. And that's also a sign of, hey, David's being betrayed by more of his family here. We got a pretty good case. Took some time, they all gather together, and they head to Gilead, which is just over the Jordan, and they amass there, preparing to strike David. But David is not nearby. David has run north where his forces need to be reinforced. Verses 27 through 29. When David came to Mahanaim, I'm going to get this, Mahanaim. I know, that sounds more Hebrewish, doesn't it? Mahanaim. Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbah of the Ammonites, and Machir, the son of Amiel from Lo Debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, brought beds, raisins, earthen vessels, wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, and lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd, for David and the people with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. David arrives, having followed the little green line, you can follow it up there, along the Rift Valley up through into the wilderness, and he receives this great welcome. There's a painting done that shows all of them gathering together. This is actually really shocking. And we think David's the hero. But if you recall, back in chapter 2 of 2 Samuel, the whole kingdom was split. David was the king of the south, and Ishbosheth was the king of the north. He had more land, and where was his capital? Mahanim. So this city used to be the capital of David's enemy. Interesting. But how did David treat the family of Saul as time went on? Very well. How did he treat, what did he do when Saul was killed? He mourned him. What did he do when Ishbosheth was killed? He mourned him. And when Jonathan's son was found, who could be a competitor to the throne, did David have him killed? No. He had him eat at his own table. So perhaps David's kindness was not forgotten by the people of the city. But it's not just the city. It's the people that show up too. It's a little bit strange. Why are these people supporting David? First, you have Shobi. Got these three guys. Shobi is the first one. And Shobi is a pagan. Shobi is the son of Nahash, who was the brother of Hanuim, who was the one who famously insulted David's messengers by shaving their beard, cutting off their pants at their waistlines so that they were exposed from underneath, right? And this started the whole Ammonite war, which led to David committing adultery with Bathsheba when he was supposed to be at war. That guy, this is his brother. Now he comes to support David, perhaps to make up for the wrong done against David. Not sure, but here he is supporting him. And I don't think he has to, because who's on the throne right now? Is David on the throne? No, Absalom is, and David's in need. So people who say he was forced to, I don't know what I'm talking about. Then you have, secondly, Machir. Machir was the one who sheltered Mephibosheth in his childhood at Lo Debar. Well, possibly after seeing David support this handicapped man rather than consider him a threat? Perhaps now he's like, you know what, David was a rescuer, and now I will be a rescuer. And then Barzillai. Barzillai was an old man who even he calls himself an old man, who in Gilead, a conquered territory to the north. They are all coming to bring refreshments and beds to David's people because here they are in the wilderness. Probably my theme is actually on this little mountain face right here, doing different archaeological studies. It's a very dry and weary land. They're out there and they're tired, and they've gone with no supplies and no beds to sleep in. They come and they give them refreshments. Was David a perfect man? Did David take advantage of people sometimes? Horribly so. This whole thing is happening because he committed adultery and murder. But David had been an honorable man for the most part. You know, the phrase that gets thrown around often is nice guys finish last, but the Bible paints a different story. We're told to be kind even to our enemy. And wisdom states, Proverbs 11:17, a man who is kind benefits himself, but a cruel man hurts himself. Why does it help you to be kind to others? Why does it help you to be kind to others? You're doing God's will? Yeah. God says better things are going to result from you doing good. Yeah. And if you're kind to others in their time of need, what are they likely going to be to you? Kind in your time of need. Yeah. But David chose the path of love. Now, we're going to finish up here, but the battle has been set. You know, this has been, a lot has taken place, right? And we're going to see that the whole battle that we talked about happens in 3 verses. But all of this is the setup to show that the victory does not belong to David. It belongs to God. But God uses a bunch of people along the way. Individuals who remain faithful to God's anointing despite the risks. They each contribute to the chain that God uses to fulfill his purposes. Hushai, Zadok, Abiathar, Jonathan, Ahimaaz, an unnamed servant girl, a man in Bahurim and his wife, Shobi, Machir, Barzillai. Our actions can seem insignificant, but God often connects them with the actions of others like links in a chain to fulfill his purposes. That should be our desire and prayer. Make me just part of the chain, God, and use me for your glory and the good of us and others.